Super excited about our guest today. We have Dr. Ayelet Fishbach from the University of Chicago booth. She's an award-winning psychologist and one of, if not the leading expert on motivation science, and one of the leading experts in the world on motivation science. Most recently, author of Get It Done, The Surprising Lessons from the Science of Motivation. She's got it in her background, and I've got it here. Really just, I think, an important book and an amazing book that makes it accessible and useful and actionable, the science of motivation and how we can get the things done that we want to get done. So today I'm excited for the conversation that we're going to have and looking forward to it. So welcome, Ayelet, to Basecamp. Excited to have you here.
I'm very excited to be here. Thanks for having me, Pat.
So I think an interesting, just to dive right in, this is a really timely discussion. We're approaching the end of January. I know in some of the research that you've done, you found that 75% of people that start the year with a New Year's resolution actually don't complete it or aren't even engaged in the resolution by the time they get to the end of the year. So we're approaching that point where probably most of us have dropped our resolutions. I'm curious, like when you hear that or when you uncovered that statistic, what did you think about that?
Well, you can think about the quarter of the people that do stick to the resolutions by next November. So I try to always look at the glass half full. But it is true that many people are going to ditch their resolutions next month. And by March, we'll see an even bigger decline. What we found is that what predicts whether people stick to the resolutions is how much they are intrinsically motivated, how much they found something that feels right to them as they are doing it. And that was quite exciting because no one sets a resolution thinking that this is going to be fun to do. People set resolutions because it's important, because they think that their future self is going to do what's important, not necessarily what is fun. And nevertheless, whether it's fun or enjoying or just feels right, this immediate positive experience is what predicts whether you're going to be one of the quarter of the people that are sticking to the resolutions.
I find that so fascinating. So if I heard you correctly, you're saying that it almost doesn't matter how important something is. What matters is how much you enjoy the thing that you're doing and how internally connected you are, internally motivated you are to do the thing. Did I hear that right?
You heard that right. Now, it's not that importance is unimportant. Obviously, we set the resolution because it was important for us. Okay, we don't set a resolution to eat more ice cream. Most of us, okay, we decide to do something that is important, which is for most people health related. So when we look at what are people's resolutions, they are usually about being in a better shape, eating better, being healthier. Then there are some financial resolutions, and then there are professional resolutions and so on. And these are all things that are important for people. So they decided on it because it was important. But whether they will actually do that depends on how it feels at the moment. Okay? It depends on whether that feels right, that feels good. And that surprised us. We thought that the momentary feeling, the enjoyment is going to be equal to importance. It turns out that explained 100% of the variance.
Wow. And so then another way of capturing or describing intrinsic motivation is, does it feel good while you're doing it? And if that's the case, then you're more likely to continue to do it. Is that correct?
It is, although the way you think about feel good, it feels right, I would say. It feels like you're achieving your goal. So we think about feeling intrinsically motivated is that there is a fusion between the goal that you're trying to achieve and the activity that you are pursuing. Like you feel that what you're doing as you are doing it gets you to where you want to be. And often it's just the fun, okay, just the enjoyment of exercising, the enjoyment of like being in the company of a person that you love. Other times it's the feeling of purpose, it's the feeling of flow. It feels that as you are doing it, you are achieving your goal. You can also think about the alternative, which is these are too far, okay, which is the possibility by which I feel like I'm exercising now because I want to be in a good shape in 10 years, okay, which is the other extreme. I really do it now for the sake of some future self that is very remote from me at the moment. And the more separation there is between the activity and the goal that it achieves, the less fusion, the less enthusiasm and intrinsic motivation people have.
That makes a lot of sense. So if something is a means to an end, it's going to be less powerful for you, less motivating for you. But if the means is the end, that by doing the activity you're actually feeling the benefit and you're seeing the progress in real time, or that it's enriching your journey, then you're more likely to stick with that and be motivated to continue with that over time.
Absolutely. Other examples for how much people don't like to work on something that feels like a means is our resistance to pay for parking or shipping or gift wrapping. We did a study in which we asked people how much they are willing to pay. They were actually bidding on a book. Okay, and ask another group of people how much they're willing to pay. They were bidding on a tote bag that contained a book. Now, the tote bag that contained that same book was a better deal because you get a bag and a book, but people were willing to pay less. The reason we don't like to invest in means. Now, this was a demonstration in the context of consumption and how much people are willing to pay, but there's also the same effect when we think about resources, when we think about working on something. We don't like to train, we like to do the thing itself. We don't like to take a prerequisite class. We want to take the class that gets us the thing that we want to study. And so often it's really a mindset of thinking about what you're doing as achieving the goal rather than as a step that will get you there.
Wow. That's so powerful. In kind of, I guess, coming back into this mindset side of things, and you talk about approach versus avoidance goals and the implications as it relates to motivation and urgency and ultimately, finding success. Could you maybe share a little bit about that and what's going on there when you're in pursuit of something rather than you're trying to avoid something? Is one favorable to the other when it comes to accomplishing your goals?
In general, thinking about your goals in terms of approach is better. It will result in greater stamina than thinking about your goals in terms of avoidance. And I say thinking about your goals because for most goals, you can really frame them one way or another. You can go to work thinking that your goal is to approach something. Maybe you want to solve a problem. Maybe you want to get a promotion, or to avoid something. Maybe you want to make sure that you don't mess up. You don't want to somehow not get a promotion. You don't want to lose your job. So it's two mindsets that relate to the same goal, and approaching is more motivating. It's also often easier to do. One of the classic demonstrations comes from thought suppression exercises and asking people to either think about something or not think about something. So either think about whatever brown bears or don't think about white bears. It is extremely hard not to think about white bears. It's extremely hard not to think about your ex if that's the goal that you set for yourself. And the reason is really that when you are trying to avoid something, you check yourself by bringing this back to mind. Okay, how do I know that I don't eat the thing that I decided not to eat? I ask myself if I ate it, and by that I bring this to mind. How do I know that I don't think about my ex? Well, I ask myself, and by that bringing that person to mind. And so avoidance goals are hard. Another problem with avoidance goals is that they tend to elicit what we call reactance. Reactance is when you don't want to do something just because you were asked to do it. Reactance is the child in you that says, I'm not going to do it because my parent asked me to. And avoidance goals, in a way, make you react against the goal. Okay, I know I should not smoke, and therefore I want to do that. for example. Saying that, I just gave you a couple of minutes speech why avoidance goals are bad. They have one advantage. They seem urgent. When you think about not doing something, that feels like you have to stop doing it immediately. When you think about approaching something, that feels like, well, maybe I can also do it tomorrow. And so we often use avoidance goals. We often tell ourselves and others, don't do that, because we want to convey urgency.
That's interesting. Would you ever think about one goal from both respects? And maybe you start from an avoidance standpoint. Maybe it's the new year and you say, I'm going to focus on heart health this year. I want to be healthy. I want to move my body more. And so I'm going to avoid sitting at my desk for long periods of time. And maybe that's the first week to get you into motion. And then maybe you transition to one of pursuit, where I'm actually going to do things that I enjoy, that there are many ways that I can just move my body. Have you all looked at that? Or
I like that. No, we haven't. What we found is that about 20%, I think, of the people set avoidance goals, and we felt bad for these people, because these are the kind of goals that we know will have less stamina. But we didn't see how people switch spontaneously. There is research showing that with power, that when people feel that they have power, they think about goals more in terms of approaching desirable states. And when they lack power, they feel about this more in terms of avoidance. And power is something that changes as you move from one situation to another, right? You might feel that you have a lot of power when you meet with your employees, and that you don't have power when you meet with your bosses, or some friends, some family members might make you feel that you have power. Other life situations might make you feel that you don't have power, and these changes will affect how you think about your goals.
I know oftentimes it's such a part of the zeitgeist, this concept of willpower, and that some people have large amounts of willpower and other people have less willpower. And we're all familiar with, or the marshmallow study, I think, goes right to this, of who can be patient and maybe exert more willpower and put off immediate rewards for longer term rewards. But I'm curious, does willpower have a role to play when we think about approach versus avoidance? And because I have to imagine, and I know there's been a lot of talk lately about New Year's resolutions and weight loss, and there's a lot of different people that get focused on this. But if you have a model of avoidance and you say, I'm going to stop eating all of these things, or I'm going to restrict in some way, that over time is going to exhaust you and deplete you. And at some point, you're going to almost completely revert to the exact opposite of what you're trying to do. But I'm curious how you think about willpower in the context of these two models.
I think that willpower is very important for motivation, but it's probably a bit overrated. And it's probably a bit overrated because we know that our motivation is very much a function of the situation. Right? It's not just whether we have willpower. It's whether we are in the situation that allows us to thrive, is whether we found something that we are excited about doing. And we know that we are willing to work very hard when we are excited. And it's hard to drag ourselves out of bed when we are unexcited. And so to the extent that there is a certain level of willpower in Ayelet, well, obviously, Ayelet can be motivated in some situations and not others, which suggests that willpower doesn't explain a lot. So willpower is important, but let's not think that everything is willpower. I also, you mentioned the marshmallow test. The marshmallow test, there is a lot of debate about how much it really predicts performance later in life. The replication studies show that it's a very small effect, if at all. Now, this is not to say that willpower doesn't predict performance. It's just to say that there is a lot that needs to happen beyond willpower. And even if you think that you don't have willpower, you might have the right strategy. Back to avoidance versus approach. avoidance goals are the kind of goals that require willpower, okay? That the goal itself already tells you, I know you want to do something, but you should avoid this, okay? It's like the don't think about white bears, okay? Like I know you want to have these thoughts or, to eat these foods, try not to do that. That calls for willpower. Approach goals, often people pursue them because they are excited, not because they were trying to get themselves to do something that they wouldn't like to do.
That sounds like a much cleaner fuel. And I guess if I'm hearing you correctly, it's almost like willpower is a snapshot in time of what's going on with your motivation, but it doesn't effectively communicate everything that is going into that motivation, whether the support or the goals that you have are intrinsic versus extrinsic. And so that's why almost it's less useful to look at willpower and more useful to look at what is feeding into motivation and why you're motivated and how you can be motivated in a way that feels sustainable or exciting to you and to helping you achieve your goals.
I absolutely agree.
Amazing. I want to come back to this concept of intrinsic motivation, and something that you talk a lot about is this empathy gap. And I find this fascinating, and I think it's something that I think it'll resonate with everyone. And maybe I'll lead with just a short story. I remember going off on training missions or going off on missions or going off on training things and thinking to myself, well, I don't need this. I don't need a jacket. I don't need to pack this food. Like, I'll be fine. I'm warm and comfortable now, and like I can handle it. And every time finding myself in a position where I really wish I had had that jacket or that extra bite of food, or that in many ways I was stacking the deck against my future self. And so I always found that funny, but it wasn't until I was reading your work and you were talking about this empathy gap that the light bulb went off for me. I said, oh, wow, okay, that's what's going on here. And I think it has some really powerful ramifications for how we think about goals and intrinsic motivation. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yes, and so I refer to the empathy gap when it gets to predicting how our future self will feel, okay, how we are going to feel and be motivated when we pursue our own goals. There is also research on the empathy gap in trying to understand other people, and the finding there is that it's really hard for us to feel something that someone else is feeling unless we feel it too. It's hard for us to be empathetic to their feelings. Now, the research that I refer to is that it's also hard for us to be empathetic to ourselves, okay, to our future selves' feelings. And that leads us to set goals that are often unrealistic, or to have plans that are often they don't fit with the reality of us. To give you an example, I ask my students, I have business students, and I ask them every year, almost every year, to predict how much they will care about their intrinsic motivation in their future job, and also how much they care about their intrinsic motivation in the present job. Now, intrinsic motivation is a concept from studies, so I don't actually use it. Ask them how important it is to do something that you like, with people that you like, to be excited about your work, to feel good about going there. Right now, for the job that you have, or for the job that you will have after the job that you currently have. And people consistently say that enjoying what they do and doing it with the people that they like, this is important for them in the present for what they do now, but this is not very important for their future job. Now, that ought to be a mistake, because if something is important for people now, well, the future is going to become the present, and they will again care about that. If what gets me out of bed in the morning is the fact that I have something interesting to do at work, then this is true now, and this will be true later. And this empathy gap, this not feeling how much my future self will care about these intrinsic motivators, is what makes us often not come up with the best plans. Let me also, I think, mention another study that I think will illustrate that. We did that study, and by we I mean Caitlin, Willie, and I, where we offered people a choice between listening to a loud alarm clock or the song Hey Jude by the Beatles. Seems obvious, but we paid more for the alarm clock. Okay? And given that we paid more for the alarm clock, the vast majority of our participants chose that. So we had like 75% of the people choosing the alarm clock because they wanted to make more money. Well, after they did the task, the people that chose the alarm clock were more likely to regret their choice than the people that chose to listen to the nice song. What we see here is that people predicting that they would care more about money than songs, but when they do the task, when they have to follow through, they actually regret that because they care much more about enjoying the music than making a little bit more money.
Wow. And so when it comes to goal setting or when it comes to goal setting and you think about the science of motivation, we may set goals for ourselves that aren't necessarily aligned to, or we may set big goals for ourselves, but ones that we don't adequately equip ourselves to accomplish, or that we don't take into account all of the barriers and challenges that we might face in the present moment because we're not actively facing those. And so this idea of can you close the gap on that by cultivating some empathy for your future self, and then create goals that maybe are aligned with what you care about not only today, but what you might care about tomorrow. Am I communicating that correctly?
Absolutely. And even think about the barriers right now. Think about what is going to make it hard and what are you going to do when it's hard. Okay, so just understanding your barriers, understanding the temptations, understanding why this is going to be difficult for you in your circumstances is often the way to come up with a more realistic plan.
I love that. As we think about getting started and we realize intrinsic motivation and empathy plays a role for our future self, you talk about this idea that it's at the start we're really motivated, and at the end we're really motivated, but there's this squishy middle that we find ourselves in where it's really easy to lose motivation. Could you talk a little bit about that and how we can think about this middle problem as you frame it?
Yeah, the middle problem is a problem. Okay, we often start with a lot of enthusiasm. Whatever we decide to take on ourselves, there is the beginning, and it's often a party. Okay, it's our first day at the job, or we just started school. We are very excited about what we are doing, to the extent that the goal has some clear end. Okay, and not all goals have that, but to the extent that we do at a certain point finish it, we complete a degree, or we finish a project, and then again there is this sense of a party, of like a lot of enthusiasm, and people are working hard. In the middle, this is when it's hard, and it's hard to stay motivated, both in terms of just doing the work. It's hard to invest resources. It's also hard to do a good job. It is in the middle where we see people relaxing their performance standards, cutting corners, if you will. We actually did a study in which people were literally cutting corners. We gave them 5 shapes on a piece of paper, a pair of scissors, and asked them to cut these shapes. And we found that they did a very good job on the first and the last shape, but they literally cut corners in the shapes in the middle. We then found that people are more likely to cheat a little bit in the middle, or just work less hard. And part of the reason is that in the middle, you just don't feel that your actions have a lot of impact. Okay, it just feels that, whether I looked at the beginning or the end, there is not much impact for the next thing that I'm going to do. At the beginning, your first step is 100% of the progress. At the end, your last step is 100% of achieving the goal. Okay, just take your last class and you have a degree. In the middle, it doesn't feel like it's doing a lot, and so we work less hard, and we also cut corners.
I found it really interesting you were talking about, and it makes a ton of sense, but I never heard it framed this way, that if you're in the first half of pursuing a goal, it's very helpful to look back and to look at what you've accomplished. So getting started, these first steps, building some initial momentum. But then as you transition to the latter half of pursuing a goal, it's helpful to look forward and say, this is what I have left to do. And it's focusing, splitting it up into halves, but then focusing on which thing seems almost more manageable and more approachable. Whereas if you're in the beginning and you look forward, you have so much to do, and like that's not very encouraging or exciting. But once you get past that middle point, you only have a little bit left, and that is exciting. Am I framing that correctly?
So you just described the psychophysics of monitoring progress in a very intuitive way. I liked it a lot. Basically, let's think of a goal that has 10 steps to it. Whatever, 10 classes to a degree, okay, 10 purchases to win a reward. Up until your fifth step, okay, if you look back, your next step will feel like it has more impact, okay? Like, my second step in this 10-step goal will feel like it doubles my progress if I look back. I moved from 1 step to 2 steps. If I look ahead and how much I still need to do, well, I moved from having to do 100% of the work to having to do 90% of the work, and that doesn't feel like a big change. Now, let's fast forward to the end of the goal. My last step will complete 100% of the progress that still remains. Okay, so that's a huge impact, and I'm highly motivated to take this last step. However, if I look back, then I move from 90% to 100%, which is, again, just 10%. So this is the psychophysics of goals. There is also another reason why it is very good to look back at the beginning, and that is that when we start on something, when we are novices, when we are not sure about our commitment, as it turned out, when we ask, am I committed? Usually we decide that we are committed if we already have evidence that we are successful, that we are doing something, okay, that we are investing in something. And so looking back and seeing that you've already done something is going to increase your commitment. So this is more the psychological effect of looking back at the beginning.
It's so powerful that this idea of progress begets progress, or wins begets wins, and to make sure that you're almost taking advantage of that. The progress that you made, don't lose sight of that, because that can be the very source of fuel that allows you to propel through maybe this challenging middle part. So that I really like the way that you frame that and talk about that. I wonder, and I recognize we're in a little bit of a unique time right now with COVID, but how do we think about goals, or think about things that we're in pursuit of where maybe it's not so time bound, or there's not a definite finish line, and the middle is a little bit hard to define. And so maybe this is a larger question in the context of, you have something that is a finite goal with a definite finish line versus something that is, a state of being that you're trying to achieve, or you want to be more present for your family, or you want to be the best you can be, whether professionally or personally. How do you think about motivation in the context of those sorts of goals?
There was a lot in your question.
Very sorry. Maybe we'll just start with the two different types of goals, if it's fair to classify them as such. One is a definite goal that has a finite end state versus something that is a little bit more unbounded, and you're trying to change something reflexively about how you're showing up, or you're trying to build better habits or a better mindset.
Yeah. So, I was willing to answer all aspects of your question. Like with COVID, like the interesting thing about that goal, okay, the COVID, learning to live with COVID, is that there is a very clear beginning. Okay. We all remember the first week, and we just don't know where it ends. So it's one of these goals where we know when we started, we just don't know where it ends, which means that we'll be often more motivated if we look back. Okay. If we look at the progress that we have made. Okay, looking at what's still missing, well, with a moving target, we don't really know. But I think that your main question was about these general goals versus specific goals that have some end. And if you think about it, all these goals that have a specific end point, there are sub-goals for more general, for more abstract goals that will never quite end, right? Like, why do you want to finish a degree? Because you want to have a career, okay? Why do you want to exercise, whatever, 4 times this week? Because you want to be healthy, okay? Being healthy doesn't have an endpoint. Okay, why do you want to do something for your family? Because you want to have a happy family. Well, that doesn't have an endpoint. And what I'm illustrating here is that all these goals that we set are often connected to overriding goals, okay, to more abstract goals that are going on with us, that are never quite ending. But the process of breaking these very general goals into more specific goals, and often putting a target, putting a number, okay, something that tells us how much and by when we want to do something, is a way to get us motivated, to get us to be able to monitor the progress that we are making toward being healthy or supportive of our family or successful professionals. And so these are efficient ways to stay motivated.
That I love that for a few different reasons. One is that when you think about the overarching goals, or the goals that almost frame up and guide all these sub goals, it seems like there is a lot of power in having clarity of what those bigger goals are. Because, and I know you talk about this idea of multi-final goals, and that there sometimes there are many ways to achieve the same thing. But now all of a sudden, if you have clarity of what the overarching goal is, there's not necessarily one way to achieve it, or one path that you have to follow, but there are a lot of things that you could be doing that map to helping you move in line with that direction. Could you talk a little bit more about how you think about that in the context of this?
Yes, when we think about the configuration of goals, we think about a hierarchy where there are few very general goals that people have, okay, like maybe health, family, career, okay? And then there are sub-goals below them that are connected to them, and then there are means that are connected to the sub-goals, and it's very hierarchical structure. And what is interesting is that then we can separate between 2 specific structures, one in which you have 2 activities or more, okay, several activities that serve the same goal. Okay, think about it as all roads lead to Rome. Sorry, I was forgetting it for a moment. All roads lead to Rome, meaning I can maybe exercise by going to the gym, or by running outside, or by doing something with my yoga app. Okay. We can also think about the other structure where the same activity serves several goals. Okay, so this is something that we capture in the sentence, feeding 2 birds with 1 scone, which is the vegetarian-friendly version of another phrase, maybe more famous. This is, I exercise, let's say if we go on a run together, then I get my exercise, and I also get my pet time, and I also get maybe to enjoy the view. Okay, so I get to have several goals at the same activity. And why is this important? Well, it is important because when we have activities that serve several goals, these are good activities. Those are the activities that help us achieve a lot with fewer actions. When we think about the goals that are all connected to the same activity, that increases our motivation. When we think about several activities that all connect to the same goal, well, these are our backup plans. Okay, and as we know, if we are maybe over 13-year-old, backup plans are important to have, okay, because often the plan A often doesn't work. Okay, plan B might also not work, and so it's good to have some alternatives. It's good to be flexible. It's good to know that if I cannot exercise in this way, I can do it in another way. We see the people that really associate their goal with just one means are very hard to adjust. Okay, people who, let's say, only think about exercising as running, and then due to whatever life injury, something they can no longer run, are really struggling to find something else, whereas other people are much more flexible, switching between means to a goal.
What role do others play in goal achievement? So we think about very much, we focus on ourselves and the goals that we have and what we have to do, and how we can buffer against maybe future challenges that we might face. But what is the role of other people in our lives? And I feel like you had some really surprising insights speaking directly to this point, but I'd love it if you could talk a little bit about this.
Well, they are critical. Okay, social support is absolutely critical. We as humans have evolved to be with other people, to work with other people. And so many of our goals are with other people. I would say that if a goal is important, probably you're not doing it alone. Okay, whether you're doing it as a company, as a country, as a family, you are doing it with other people. And so many of the goals that we are pursuing with other people. For our individual goals, we really care about what others around us think about that. We need to feel supported. We need to feel that this is the right thing to do. We are looking for role models. Often we find that the best role model is not the person who does it well necessarily, is the person who wants you to succeed. Okay, watching a famous athlete on TV is not going to get you to exercise. Is having a person in your life that cares about exercising and that wants you to exercise. So you perceive them as wanting you to exercise. These are the role models that work. And when you talk about some of the surprising insights, something that never stops surprising me is how much we connect to people based on how much they can support our goals. That is, we are drawn closer to people that we feel know us and will support our goal. We think that we are knowing people, that we care about knowing people around us, that this is very central for our relationship, and it is important, but it's often less important than feeling that they know us, that we are supported by them. So there is a bit of a surprising effect here where we feel the relationship is about us supporting them, and it's important, right? If we don't support them, they will not be with us. But often when we try to predict relationship satisfaction, it's driven most by how much we feel supported.
Wow. That's so powerful and important. I think it doesn't matter in the context of a marriage or a family or a team or a community. Understanding the dynamic that's at play, I think, is a really, really insightful and an important thing to focus on. So thank you for sharing that. I'm curious, of all, you've obviously been in motivation science for such a long period of time, and there's so much going on here. One of the things that I took from reading your work and getting more familiar with your work is that there are a lot of overarching principles, and there are a lot of forces that are at play when it comes to motivational science, but there isn't necessarily one way to do things. There's not one way that's right. And really it's understanding the individual and helping the individual see what is applicable in their unique situation based on what their desires are, or what their challenges are, or what is going on in their environment, or who's around them. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that. Like, though we have the application of these principles at an individual level.
I really appreciate you saying that, because I think that this is absolutely critical, that we understand that there is no one recipe fits all. Okay? There is no one secret that you just hear that and all problems are solved. There are many barriers, okay? And I often start by asking, what's your barrier, okay? You tell me that you're not motivated to do something. Why aren't you doing it? And the nice thing is that once we understand what are the possible barriers, then we can think about what are the menu of interventions that we can apply to others and to ourselves. And so in my framework, I start with 4 general buckets of interventions. Okay, I ask about setting the goal. Have you set the right goal? Is it an intrinsic goal? Is it a goal that you feel that you're incentivized to pursue? Is it a goal and not a means to a goal? And the second bucket is your progress, how you monitor it. Okay, do you know how well you do? Okay, do you get good feedback? Okay, are you learning from that feedback? Okay, maybe that's why it's hard to stay motivated, because I don't know how well I'm doing. The third bucket of interventions is managing multiple goals. Okay, how do you juggle everything else in your life? This thing that you're trying to achieve, how well does it fit with everything else that you're expected to do? Okay, maybe it fits well, and so there's no problem there. And maybe it doesn't fit very well. Okay, maybe you're trying to save money, but you are also planning to make many purchases. So this is just not going to work. Okay? These goals are just in conflict. And then the last one is back to your previous question, is the social support. Okay, how supported are you? Who in your life is supporting this goal? Who's helping you? Who's giving advice? If there is no one, then that's the barrier. Then you need to find the people that are going to be supportive of the goal that you're trying to pursue. And once we understand that there are interventions in each of these buckets, now we can think about what best fits our situation.
Well, in hearing you talk about the 4 buckets, it just makes me think about how important it is to go slow at the beginning, and to take the time to almost bring about as much clarity as you can, not only of what is the goal that you're selecting and why is that goal important to you, and is it the right goal for you? And you talk extensively in your work around what happens when you choose the wrong goal, and the outcomes that can come that maybe are counter to actually what you're trying to bring about. And so, but this idea of taking time at the outset to think about, am I selecting the right goal? And then also to think about, what are those metrics that would tell me if am I progressing towards that goal? And sometimes, and I would love your thoughts on this, sometimes there frankly isn't a number that can tell you how you're performing. And so there's a level of intuition, or a level of maybe it's a change in your relationships, or it's a change in energy levels, something a little bit more subjective and less analytic in terms of that. But then on the multiple goals side, I would imagine that understanding what that overarching goal is, what those sub goals are, and recognizing that, hey, at some point you may have to move up to that overarching goal and then drop back down into a sub goal. And this idea that you can move around, but you have a larger context of what is the bigger goal at hand, I would think would serve as additional motivation, and maybe even a form of encouragement when you do get knocked off track, or when something goes astride. And then, does it fit with you? Does it fit with your current life circumstance or situations? And then do you have the right people around to support you? So I ramble a little bit, but all to underscore the importance of how important goals are, and to really be slow and deliberate at the outset, to take the time to think about how you can, and this, I guess, comes back to this empathy gap, how can you think about your future self and what happens, what's going to happen between today and tomorrow when that future self arrives, and if you achieve that goal, what comes from that. So again, I threw a lot out there, but if there's anything that you'd want to pull out of that and speak to, I would love to hear it.
I love that you use the word deliberate, because there is a work by Peter Gollwitzer talking about being in a deliberative mindset versus implemental mindset. And the idea is that when you start on something, even before you choose your goal, or you choose your specific goal, okay, like a specific target, you need to be very deliberative, okay? You need to deliberate your options, and you need to be open-minded and really evaluate things very calmly and with less bias. Okay, and we are always all biased. Once you finish deliberating and you're committed to something, this is when you implement, and that's a different mindset. This is like the go get them mindset. This is when you're just like going full force and you're trying to get the thing that you spend time deliberating on. There is also related work on people that are more generally in their personality tend to assess. They are called assessors, and they are just more thoughtful about what they are going to do versus those that are locomotors. And the locomotors are the people that are just like, go get them, okay? They are just, they are constantly on the movement. Okay, the assessors are more thoughtful. So going back to deliberating versus implementing, very important to start with deliberation before you move to implement whatever you deliberated about.
I love that, and I know we won't have time to talk through that deliberate process, but you've got a lot of great stuff and Get It Done, where you help people think about those frameworks and the process for being more deliberate when you're setting those goals. So, but I love that you touched on it here. I'm curious, what's your biggest goal right now? Is there a goal, something that you are in pursuit of, whether it's overarching or a sub goal? And does it map to motivational science, or is it something outside of your professional work?
So I just had a book coming out, and that reminded me something that I often wrote about, which is that positive feelings come from pursuing a goal. Once you achieve the goal, you are a bit confused. Okay, so like the day the book came out, it was January 4th. I was very happy and excited, and it was great. But then it was January 5th, and like, okay, what do I do now? Okay, and so I am actually at the point where the big project is done. I have many research papers that I'm excited to go back and invest myself in each one of them. And then I'm on the watch for, I'm deliberating. I want to know what is the next big thing. I don't know yet.
I love it. I love it. Well, I think having the confidence to say you're in the deliberate stage of the process, I think that says a lot. I'm curious. I know you had mentioned that something that you were interested in looking at more is this idea of how one can cultivate intrinsic motivation when something doesn't feel good. Could you talk a little bit about that and what you hope to find through your work there?
Yes, that's actually a paper that just came out where we were trying to understand what leads people to, or actually, we're trying to understand how to help people get beyond that, like the first few steps, okay, get beyond that, like the beginnings that are often uncomfortable and pursuing a goal that eventually they are going to be excited about. So often you don't enjoy what you're doing, or it doesn't feel right with you when you just start. And we were looking at it in the context of improvisation. And we were working here with the Second City Improvisation Club in Chicago. And it turned out that when you start learning improvisation, it feels very awkward. It feels unpleasant unless you're some natural actor. I'm not. And so, when my first improvisation class, I mainly felt embarrassed. But if you do it a few times, it starts to feel right with you. Okay, you learn to like it, and you can really like it. And so what we did was asking people to feel uncomfortable. So their goal for their first class when they do the exercises was to feel uncomfortable. And it turned out that those that had the goal to feel uncomfortable felt right about the exercise. It was easy to feel uncomfortable. They were taking more risks. They were like dancing instead of just walking around. They were doing more improv, weird things, and they were more enthusiastic to keep going and to continue studying improvisation, developing themselves. We then tested it with a bunch of other activities like writing about difficult experiences or opening yourself to opinions that are different from your opinions. And we found that when people have the immediate goal of feeling uncomfortable, they are more willing to engage, and eventually that will feel right. Okay, but at the beginning, it's really about embracing the discomfort.
Oh, that's amazing. So almost with a very small intervention where you frame, hey, discomfort is part of the goal, then all of a sudden that discomfort feels good and is a source of fuel for continued progress and effort. I guess very much almost full circle back to some of Carol Dweck's work and growth mindset and recognizing that discomfort is not a sign that you're not achieving progress or you're not unable to move towards the goal, but that rather this is what it feels like to grow. Does that marry with the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so this is why this intervention works, okay? Because when people feel discomfort, it's a good sign, okay? Like I was trying to feel uncomfortable and here I'm feeling uncomfortable. So this is a sign that this thing is working. It's like feeling the sweat when you're exercising. Like it's a good sign. That means that I'm doing it right. And so absolutely you're right. When we ask people what's going on in their mind, they say that they take it as a sign that they are growing, that this thing is working for them.
That's amazing. That's amazing. To come back to your, you were talking about locomotors versus assessors and more people that deliberate. I'm curious, is one more associated with higher levels of motivation or a greater goal achievement, or does it just depend upon the individual and the circumstance and situation?
So the distinction that I made between deliberation and implementation, these are mindsets that people go through as they are pursuing a goal. So we are all starting deliberating. Okay, should I do this or should I do that? Or what's the right way of doing it? And once we make a plan, this is when we move into implementing. The related distinction between those who always assess, okay, those that are much more likely to spend a lot of time deliberating, they are the assessors, versus those who are moving, the locomotors, the people who are more implementing. The locomotors seem to be highly motivated. Like from the outside view, those are the people that are constantly on the move, and so they seem highly motivated. It is not the case that they are objectively more motivated. Okay, they might be also the people that are running in circles. Okay, and so they might not be necessarily getting farther in life. Okay, but they generate a lot of movement.
I feel like we all know those people, and some of us may be some of them at times, but these almost miserable high achievers, people that from an external standpoint, it seems like they're doing a lot or there's a lot going on, but from an internal standpoint, maybe there's some misalignment between the output and maybe the more intrinsic goals that could otherwise set them up in a better way. So I love that. Okay, so we've covered so much, and again, I recognize there's no way we could get through all of your work and research, but I'm curious if you were to leave everyone with one takeaway as it relates to motivation and goal setting, and if you could just deliver one message to someone right now, that anyone that's on or that's listening, as it relates to your work, what would you want to tell them or leave them with?
One thing. So, I wrote a book and you want me to give one thing. Okay. Well, let me go with giving advice. Here's what I suggest. When you are struggling with something, give advice to another person that you think is struggling with the same thing. Okay. Even like someone that doesn't exist, like do this as a mental exercise, give advice. Okay. What we found is that when people were struggling with whatever, okay, with their finance, with getting a job, with their weight, with doing their homework in school, when they gave advice to another person that was struggling, they felt motivated by their own advice. Now, the reason that I chose this one thing is that I think it best illustrates the idea that we can motivate ourselves, that we can change things for ourselves. And this is really the message for my work. Then self-motivation is possible. We can change our own circumstances such that we are more motivated. And giving advice to another person is an easy way to just bring to the front of your mind everything that you know about pursuing that specific area of your life where you're struggling, and it works. It gives us motivation.
Wow. Well, I know it's impossible to summarize a book in one statement, but I think that is such a powerful takeaway. And not only is it actionable, but it's effective from the work that you've done. And it maps very well to something that I've talked a lot about. And you see it in training, you see it in operations, and in periods of peak stress. That there are really two ways that you can go when you're under stress. One is you can focus on your own pain and suffering, and that amplifies your attention directed on that, amplifies the effects of what you're experiencing. The other way is to focus on someone else in a way that you can be in service to someone else. And in doing so, not only are you directing your attention away from your own pain, but in being in service to someone else, you feel the reverberating effects of that, and you feel your own pain is lessened, but your capacity to handle is almost increased. And whether that's from an emotional contagion or just being in service, or maybe it's some of the effect of what you're sharing here. But I love this idea that you can serve someone else, and that is actually going to lift up your capacity for motivation and for ultimately goal achievement. So I hope I didn't mischaracterize what you said, but it reminded me of something that I've talked a lot about, and I think just such a great message for people to hear.
I love that connection. I actually didn't quite make this connection until now. So thank you.
Amazing. Well, thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you, Dr. Ayelet Fishbach, for being here, and for just for the work that you do. I think it is. The work that you do is important, but the fact that you make it accessible and you take time to share it out with the world, I think really does impact the world in a positive way. And so, we talked about so much today, from types of goals you can set, different approaches to those goals, mindsets, intrinsic motivation, empathy gap, some of the principles of motivation science. But again, we always come back to the fact that your situation is unique and the application of these principles is unique to you. But if you recognize that discomfort and the uncertainty around testing some of these things out and applying them in a deliberate fashion is only going to pay dividends in the long run. That go slow now so you can go fast later, and recognize that when you make the destination the journey, good things come from that, and you're going to feel more motivation and ultimately find more achievement through that process. So, Dr. Fishbach, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for sharing with us, and I look forward to sharing more with all of you soon. And if you have not had a chance, again, I can't recommend get it done more. It's a great work, and it's actionable, it's accessible, and it's effective. So all things we care about here.
Thank you so much for having me. It was absolutely a pleasure.
Okay. Take care, everyone. We will see you all again soon. To our members and new visitors, thank you for making time on a Thursday afternoon, evening for some. It's always great to see your faces, and keep up the great work. We'll talk soon.